Hello and welcome to Rulebreaker. Today we're going to be showing you how to play Game of Thrones the card game in a little bit more detail. This video is going to focus on keywords and a few other more complex mechanisms from the game. If you haven't already seen the main video on how to play Game of Thrones, there's a link in the description. You should definitely check that out first. So without further ado, let's get on to keywords. Okay, so keywords are common terms used on multiple cards in this game. If you look here, stealth is written above all the other text on Arya Stark's card, and it's also written here on Tyrion Lannister. Stealth will do the same thing for both of these characters. It's a way for common game terms to be used without having to write lots of text on the cards. Lots of the best characters in the game will have these keywords on them. Okay, so the first keyword we're going to talk about today is Renown. Renown is an alternative way of getting additional power for your faction. Again, power is what you need to win the game. You need to get 15 of these. So every power counts, and Renown is a great way of getting it outside of power challenges. Okay, so in this example, Starks have Robb Stark, who has the Renown keyword here, and the Lannisters have a couple of guys that they can defend with. Okay, so Robb Stark here is going to initiate a military challenge. This is the one with the red icon. So he kneels like this, and on the Lannister side, they're going to defend with this guy, Gold Cloaks, and he's got a strength of 2, so Robb Stark wins the challenge. He has a claim of 1, so Lannisters take him his claim, and at the end of the challenge, Robb gets a power like this. So as you can see, this is a way of getting power outside of the power challenge. Another way that this could have come onto Robb's card is as the defender. So in this case, Gold Cloaks could have been the attacker initiating a military challenge. Robb Stark could have defended and won the challenge and gotten the power. Another thing to note about power on characters is that in this situation, Robb Stark is knelt from having done a challenge. He's against Greyjoys, and the Greyjoy players decided to do a power challenge. So initiates power challenge against the Starks. Starks have no power on their faction card. They can't defend, so the Greyjoys will win the challenge, but they don't get any power claim because there is no power on the faction card. In power challenges, you don't take power from cards like Robb, you can only take it from the faction card. So gaining power onto characters through Renown is a really efficient way of keeping power away from other houses and other factions. So it is entirely possible that you could keep getting lots of extra power on Renown characters throughout the game, and you may even be able to win the game without getting any power on your faction card if you've got 15 on characters. Okay, up next is the limited keyword. It's not as exciting as Renown in gameplay terms. Limited is what it says on the tin, it's a limitation. If you have a look here, this Rose Road has limited written on it, and this King's Road also has it written on here. It mainly shows up on locations, but it can show up on other cards too. Basically, you can only have one limited card marshalled in the marshalling phase each round. It actually says this on the Rose Road card. If you have that from your core set, you'll see it right there. It reads, no more than one limited card may be marshalled or played by each player each round. So if you had both these cards in your hand, the King's Road and the Rose Road, you could only play one of them in the marshalling phase. You could have 1 gold and you could pay for a King's Road, and even though this one's free, you wouldn't be able to pay for it because of limited. The main exception to limited in the game is during setup. If you are setting up your board at the beginning of the game, you can play a limited card during that, and in the first round you could pay for another limited card in the first round because you're not putting this card into play during setup. Setup is completely different. Yeah, and that's it. Limited is pretty straightforward. Okay, up next is Intimidate. This is one of the trickier keywords. It's got a little bit of complexity to it. The character in this case with Intimidate is Victarion Greyjoy. He's pretty badass character in the game. And as you can see here, he has Intimidate. He actually has Intimidate and Renown. He's got two keywords, but for this demonstration, we're just going to focus on Intimidate. So he's going to be up here for the Greyjoys, and he's going to be against the Lannisters. You've got a bunch of guys here. What Intimidate does is it allows the player with the Intimidate character to kneel characters controlled by the losing opponent. In order to do that, they must win a challenge, much like Renowned, where to get the power you have to win the challenge. You've got to win the challenge to kneel the other player's character. Winning is not enough, however. You must win the challenge by the strength of the character you wish to kneel before you can kneel them. So let's have a look here. Let's say that Victarion here is going to initiate a power challenge against the Lannisters. So he initiates his challenge. He's got 5 strength here. The Lannisters, they only have one guy with a power icon to defend. This guy, Lannisport Merchant. So he defends. So the Greyjoys are successful. They've won the power challenge, and Victarion's 5 and Lannisport Merchant's 1 mean there's a difference of 4. So in this case, as much as he'd like to kneel Sir Gregor Clegane here with his 10 strength, he doesn't have 10 to spare. He only has 4 to spare. So he can kneel Shagga, son of Dolph, as a result of Intimidate and winning the challenge. If Shagga had had 5, that would have been too many, of course. Or if Shagga had had 3, it would have been okay as well. You can overspend your Intimidate if you want to think about it that way. Okay, moving on to Pillage. Pillage is a keyword that targets your opponent's deck. If you have a look here, this Blackwind's crew has Pillage. The card itself for Blackwind's crew actually explains Pillage. It says here, after you win a challenge in which this character is participating, you may discard 1 card from the top of the losing opponent's deck. So in this example, Blackwind's crew for the Greyjoys is going to initiate a military challenge. The Starks have no military defenders, so this is a successful challenge. The Starks take claim by killing this character, and then Pillage will happen. So Pillage means that the Stark player must take the top card of their deck and discard it. So in this case, Jon Snow is discarded. Remember that there is an alternative condition to winning the game, where if you eliminate all of the other players' cards from their deck, you can win. This is a very difficult way to win this game, but it's not impossible, and Pillage will go a long way to doing that. Back in our example here, just to show that Pillage, like all keywords, can be used in any challenge type. This other Blackwind's crew here could Pillage by using a power challenge, just like this one did with the military challenge. The same can be done with an intrigue challenge, just like any other keyword. Pillage is one of the most frustrating keywords for an opponent. If you happen to discard a key card from their deck that they might only have 1 copy of, you're really going to get them annoyed. Okay, moving on to Stealth, which is probably my favorite of the keywords in this game. This player is playing Greyjoy and has Astra Greyjoy. And Astra has Stealth. as you can see here. Stealth is really good. It gives you lots of options, because what it allows you to do is, if this character is attacking, you can choose a character on the other side of the table, one of your opponents, and that character can't block. So for example here, if Asha decides to initiate a power challenge against the Lannisters, she can choose one of these characters and they won't be able to defend. Incidentally, Tyrion here on the other side of the table also has stealth, as you can see here, which means that he cannot be chosen by stealth. Stealth guys can't stealth other stealth guys, so Asha cannot choose Tyrion for stealth. However, she can choose any other character who doesn't have stealth. So Asha decides Tywin can't block in this particular challenge. So Tyrion can still defend, but Asha is going to win this challenge because Tyrion only has 4 strength while she's got 4, and in the case of a tie, the attacker wins the challenge. Stealth is particularly powerful for the Greyjoy house, as they get a lot of additional bonuses for doing unopposed challenges, and if you can choose which characters are going to defend on the opponent's side of the table, you're going to be very strong. Next up is Terminal. This is a keyword you'll find mainly on attachment cards. If you have a look here, we've got Tywin Lannister, and he's got this attachment, Knighted, on him, which does not have the keyword Terminal. And Tyrion Lannister here, he's been given Milk of the Poppy by the enemy player, and this does have Terminal written on it. And it actually says here beside Terminal on this card, whereas it doesn't on most: if attached card leaves play, discard this attachment. So if the Lannisters were military challenged and both of these characters were killed, Tywin would be killed, he'd go into the dead pile, and Knighted would actually go back to the Lannister player's hand to be used later, so they would keep that. However, when Tyrion is killed, this Milk of the Poppy is discarded, and in the case of this card, it would go into the owner's discard pile, which would be the other player, but that player would not get this card back into their hand to use again. Okay, no attachments is a keyword you'll see quite a lot of, especially on creatures, dragons, characters that are not people, sometimes on locations. You'll see it throughout the different types of cards in the game. The 3 dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal and Viserion, they all have no attachments. So for example, you wouldn't be able to attach Drogo's Arak onto any of those. A dragon wielding a sword is kind of absurd, so you won't see that happen, which is detrimental to these characters. They can't be boosted by things like that and other attachments. However, it's also beneficial in some ways. So our friend Milk of the Poppy, who we just saw a moment ago, can't be attached to these creatures either to blank their text box. Basically, no attachments is a double-edged sword in that way. You can plan to have a lot of characters with no attachments to shut out other players' decks that are based on attaching things to your characters. Martell faction, for example, have a lot of attachments that they stick on other characters to take away their icons or make them weaker in some way. This no attachments keyword will protect you from things like that. Okay, ambush is an interesting keyword. I'm just going to show you the character here. It's Burned Men. He's got ambush of 2, And it actually says here, you may pay 2 gold to put this card into play from your hand during the challenges phase. Normally you can't play characters outside of the marshalling phase, so this is a really cool way of tricking your opponent into thinking that you've got less available characters than you actually have, provided you can pay for them. So in this example we have the Baratheon player up here with a Vanguard Lancer who has a military icon and 1 strength, and opportunistically the Lannisters don't have any characters with a military icon, or so the Baratheon player thinks. Baratheon player initiates a military challenge for 1 strength. The Lannister player appears to have no defenders, but they have 2 gold, which they spend, and in comes our burned men for ambush. The burned men can immediately defend if they want, which this Lannister player will do, so the Baratheon player has failed their military challenge and they won't be killing this Lannisport moneylender today. The ambushed in character remains in play. There's no losing the character or the character returning to your hand as you might have seen in other games, unless it specifically says that on the card. If a character is ambushed in, they're in play for good. Okay, and the last keyword, the last but not least, is insight. If you have a look here at Samwell Tarly, he has the insight keyword, which says after you win a challenge in which this character is participating, you may draw a card. Good old Sam, he's one of our favourite characters from the show and the books. He's not particularly strong in the game other than this keyword actually. That's his main use. So let's see it in action. The Night's Watch player is going to initiate an intrigue challenge against the Targaryen player like this for 1 strength. The Targaryen player doesn't have any intrigue icons to defend with. The Night's Watch player wins the challenge, which results in claim as normal. It would be an unopposed power in this case too, and then insight happens. So once the challenge is over, the Night's Watch player just draws one of the cards, Castle Black here, and adds it to their hand, and that's insight. One more thing I'd like to talk about in this video, separate from keywords, is the agendas. Here's some of them, like Kings of Winter, Kings of Summer, the Lords of Crossing, Fealty, and the Reigns of Castamere. These guys are quite interesting. The rules are that you can have 1 agenda for your faction at any one time. So there's no reason really to not play one of these unless you see a detrimental effect that doesn't synergize well with your deck. These 4 here all have a downside, so to speak, but Fealty itself is pretty useful if you are planning on not doing anything drastic with your agenda. If we have a look at it closely here, it does have a small downside, which is you cannot include more than 15 neutral cards to your deck, but it gives you a pretty good benefit. You can kneel your faction card to reduce the cost of the next loyal card you marshal or play this phase by 1. In particular houses that are not strong on economy, people like the Night's Watch, the Starks, they tend to lean on this to bring out their most important loyal characters. Fealty is a good fallback agenda if you don't plan on running anything more specific than that. The other banners that you'll find in the core box are the ones on the opposite side of your faction card, which matches the faction on the front. They're all called banners. Banner of the Lion for Lannisters, Banner of the Stag for Baratheons, Banner of the Wolf for Starks, and so on. They all have the same text except for the icon, so they're all pretty much the same. What they do is they allow you to add cards, non-loyal cards, from the particular faction to a deck that is of a different faction. So for example, you could have a Targaryen deck with Banner of the Stag, and this would allow you to have mainly Targaryen cards, but also add at least 12, it has to be at least 12, so 12 or more Baratheon cards, as long as those cards are not loyal cards. And just to show what loyal cards are, if you have a look at the Targaryen sigil here on Daenerys Targaryen, it's got this white ribbon on it at the bottom. This denotes that she's a loyal Targaryen card, while Mirri Maz Duur doesn't have the ribbon on the sigil, which means that she's non-loyal, so she can be used when you're using Banner of the Dragon. Okay, that's it for this time. That's keywords and agendas covered. Again, if you haven't watched the main video where I explain how to play the game, go back and check that out. In future, I'm going to also run through the cards in the deluxe boxes and the chapter packs one by one as they come out. And also I'm going to do a video on Melee, which I'll leave a link to in the description of this video if you want to check that out. Melee is the multiplayer version of Game of Thrones, 3 players plus. Make sure you come back and check that out, and all the other game videos that will follow. Thank you.